Any more questions from council? So I think we have a motion on the floor. So I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed. That motion carries. Thank you. All right, let's move on to item E1, recommendations from committees. Madam Clerk, would you please introduce that for us?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. This first item is a recommendation from the Committee of the Whole meeting of February 15th. This is in regard to the removal of 574 Walter Avenue from the Saanich Heritage Registry. Council is requested to ratify that motion from the Committee of the Whole meeting with the addition that, or the slight change, the motion from Committee of the Whole was that Council support the removal of 574 from Walter Avenue from the Saanich Heritage Registry. The motion should read as that Council approve the removal of 574 from the Saanich Heritage Registry.
Thank you. Would someone like to move that?
So moved. Second.
Move the second. Any discussion on this? Seeing none, call the question. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed. That carries unanimously. Thank you. All right, and the final item on our portion of our agenda, item E2, Madam Clerk.
Yes, this next item is the Healthy Saanich Advisory Committee, recommendations from the LGBTQ Subcommittee. The recommendations from the February 24th Healthy Saanich Advisory Committee are requesting that Council consider a safe and welcoming signage for Saanich-owned properties, sensitivity training, diversity in Saanich-produced marketing and advertising material, and the pride and trans flags. Council can consider all of these, or each of these independently, or can consider them in whole or in part, in lumps, or all together.
Thank you for that. Councilor Platt, would you like to take the lead on this, please, as your chair of this committee?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will suggest that we deal with them individually so that people have the opportunity, unless I see nodding of heads to the opposite, because I don't want to make it more difficult than it needs to be, but I also want to give people the opportunity. So maybe I'll start by asking, which would you prefer, Mr. Mayor, as a way of process of dealing with this?
I think it's a good idea, being a way to give us a bit of background with each motion.
Sure, happily then. So I will move the first recommendation that Saanich install safe and welcoming signage at Saanich-owned buildings.
Second.
So I would just give a bit of context for colleagues. So the process for the subcommittee, as everyone hopefully recalls, is that any recommendations must come back to Healthy Saanich, and these were put through at our February 24th meeting, and I'm happy to report that all of the recommendations before you today passed unanimously. I'm happy to just provide a little bit of context for where the recommendations come from. The recommendations come from a sense of the committee members feeling these were ways to make Saanich even more welcoming and more supportive. The suggestion is not without the understanding that these items will cost money, but the committee was told to not have that be their primary concern, that indeed was the concern of council. The idea, though, behind the signage, to be honest, was perceived likely to be a vinyl sticker or a small placard at our Saanich buildings. So the first one was the idea that these would have a statement to the effect that Saanich buildings are welcoming and safe for members of the LGBT community, and it could be a small rainbow or pride flag. That's all. If anybody else has any questions or comments, I'd be happy to try and address them.
Thank you. I'll go to Councilor Bryson, who had it first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll just say this about all of the recommendations, and I trust that we're taking them individually because that's the way the decision was made. I guess an overarching interest of mine would be, yes, I support this in principle. I would like to see, quite frankly, a staff report back on these so that we incorporate best practices. We're obviously not an island unto ourselves. There's obviously other communities within our own area and others who are embarking presumably on these types of endeavors. I think that sometimes uniqueness is good, but sometimes consistency of messaging is also helpful to the public. And so I guess that would be my caveat, that I support the concept here, but would be interested in some staff input on this and all other of the recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm just going to move over to staff to ask a question based on that. So the motion here is asking for safe and welcoming signage, and we got an explanation from Councillor Plant on that. But like, how do we define that? And has it been done at the committee level already? I mean, if the buildings are safe and welcoming, I know that sounds quite obvious, but we're essentially, putting our stamp on the building that they are. How is that quantified for the person who's entering the building?
Through your worship, I think that staff don't have specific direction. The comments provided by Councillor Plant about specific wording with regard to safe and welcoming signage is quite helpful actually in this discussion. As Council is aware, there is signage in all of our facilities about a welcoming workplace. So this could be kind of an additional piece onto that existing signage, or it could be a standalone approach. Staff haven't dedicated any resources or time to think about it. As I said, the comments from Councillor Plant certainly help in terms of trying to understand what the intent behind it is in some detail. But at this point, I don't think I can fully answer your questions about what it would mean.
All right, thank you. I think we got a lot from that. Thank you. I'm going to continue with questions from Council, and then I'm going to move to Councillor Wervoet and then Councillor Haynes. I'm seeing all the hands. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a little bit of difficulty with this. And the wording was, signage buildings are welcoming and safe for all members of our community, rather than singling out any specific group. I feel much better. I think there's a problem in just singling out one particular group at this time, at any time. Just my comment.
Councillor Haynes, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm just processing that. That was very thoughtful, Councillor. Yeah, I get the point you're making. No, really, because if we wish the LGBTQ to be fully reconciled with our community, then we are one community. So that would be the basis of your position. So that said, I think that right now there is a feeling from the LGBTQ community that perhaps they do need some recognition that they don't feel safe, and that by maybe naming them in that, it maybe give that sense of welcomeness for them. So I'm not quite sure where that's going to fall. I'm going to think about that more, but I do take what you say sincerely. I'm wondering, with the staff report idea, I mean, we are a little bit ahead of the curve on some of this. We are showing some serious leadership on this, and I'm very proud to see Council unanimously support this approach to have such a subcommittee. And this is the first set of recommendations they've come forward. I'm just wondering if there was a staff report agreed to by Council, what the timeline would be around that, and how timely it could be, given that you've got a bunch of things on the hand. Because we're already deep into the year with this committee, and it would be nice to get information back on these. If it was going to take a long time, I would move that we don't need the report. But then again, we're exposed to absence of that robust information. So it's a tricky position. Maybe staff could give us some guidance, please.
Without having had any discussion at the staff level about what would be required for a report, beyond seeing the recommendations coming from committee, is difficult for me to say. I don't know which department would carry this as a responsibility, nor how it fits into workload. So I can't really respond back to giving you a time frame for a report to come back. And it depends a little bit on what Council is looking for in the report. There's a number of the items that I think are relatively straightforward. One of them being the signage. It seems at face value quite straightforward. The one about sensitivity training, that would require, I think, some significant research and an understanding of what that means organizationally wide. We're undertaking significant organizationally wide training on a number of different areas, including the privacy program, and to impose or inject another organization-wide training program on top of that would require some resources and some juggling of time. So my point, I guess, long story, is that I can't tell you how long it would take to come back with a staff report. I think that there are some that are quite straightforward, and there are others that would require some time. But it may be
so maybe triage to have the easy ones first and then give us a sense of what the longer ones would take. And the staff training one was the one I thought was more difficult of all of these. I'll leave my comments there, thank you.
I think I'm going to jump in and just looking down to item 2, which we'll be looking at next, sensitivity training. 3, diversity and sandwich. Produce marketing, advertising materials in gender neutral language. And 4, pride and trans flags, which I believe are being flown during a certain week of the year. And so that's number 5? All flags combined. I just want to look around the council to see if we're going to be asking similar questions of these other items. But we really need to get staff report back on all of these items to find out what the impact of the municipality is going to be and how best to make this happen. So I guess the first question I would just ask if staff wants to direct it to our CAO is, in future, is for the benefit of ourselves and for the functioning of this committee, should the staff report have come back to the committee first so that it could be backed by the recommendation from the committee, or it should be coming here to council with a staff report? What's the best way to do that from staff's perspective?
Well, I think that in terms of all the information possible being available to council to make a decision, it's probably more beneficial to council that kind of work is done at the committee level and is run through the committee and then comes forward to council with the opportunity to have some clear direction. However, committees work in different ways, and this committee, the working group, the subcommittee, and the committee chose to come forward with recommendations really for council then to wrestle with what that means in terms of implications. But it's worth having, I think, at the committee level to have some discussion with the implications so that council has more information to make fully formed decisions.
Thank you. That's the way I see it as well. I think that we're delegating to the committees in order to get them to do a specific body of work. Minutes are very, very good, but they're not answering enough of the questions here. And so I just want to make sure that there are staff resources available to that committee to get this kind of thing done.
Well, the caveat I would make to that is that to dedicate those staff resources, it really needs to come back to council. So it might be more appropriate that this kind of general recommendations is referred back to the committee, or a report from staff is then sent back to the committee for the committee to wrestle with and perhaps change the recommendations or modify them to come forward to council. It's really council's decision about dedicating resources, not the committee itself.
I have a recommendation, but before I do that, I'm going to look to Councillor Plant to answer some of these questions for us.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just would draw council's attention that the advisory committees have no jurisdiction at all to create staff work. So the recommendation is that it needs to come from us. If we want a staff report, I think Councillor Bryce is quite right, and I would not want to rush anybody into a decision. If you need more information, great. So the notion that these advisory committees should ask staff for reports is wrong. So we can't do that. So if we wish to do that and then send it back, I imagine it's going to come back saying, yes, please do this. And Healthy Saanich provided that information as well, saying, yes, please do this. I would just offer that perhaps we have a staff report for us so we can have that information. Thank you.
It makes sense. What I'm reading from this is that it's very easy for any of the committees to just make a motion and to push it forward, but without knowing the ramifications of the motion, then it really just sort of comes at the committee and bounces back and forth. So I'm kind of looking for the committees to be productive as themselves as well as us being productive. I'm going to move down the speakers list and then we'll get to maybe a change in this. Councillor Sanders, and then Murdoch, and then Dermott, and then Brownell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was sort of of the same mind, looking at them all together, although we're just looking at number 1 now. And I would like to see a staff report. And as I read these, I thought, we can apply this to everything. Are we welcome? I mean, I know that we have 8 languages, I think, at the entrance door here, welcoming people. I can only read 1, by the way, unless there's a bit of French. But anyway, so we're welcoming a lot of people. We're a respectful workplace. Is that available in all our recreation centers? And that I don't know that. And I think when I'm looking at this, and I look in some ways that it's not inclusive, because we have a number of new immigrants that have come to Canada, and we have them here in our community. And what about the ongoing discussion about women in burqas? Do they feel comfortable coming into our rec centers? Do you feel that they can't? And so I thought about that. And then, what about people that are physically and mentally handicapped? Or maybe some older people don't feel comfortable. And so, to me, a lot of these apply completely. We should welcome everybody. And does our staff have sensitivity training for all people? So I'm not going to go through these one by one, but I do believe that this is a bigger picture that addresses everybody in our community. We're one community, and in some ways I feel that actually by picking one group out like this does make them different rather than being inclusive. So those are just my thoughts, and I'd like to see a staff report including this, but also maybe it gives us a time to look at whether we're using general neutral language that is acceptable for the general community and such. So I'll just leave it at that and hear what my colleagues have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Murdoch?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate the benefits of the comments from my colleagues. Mr. Thorkelson pointed out as an example exactly the concern I had with respect to sensitivity training, and without knowing further information about what we're actually asking for, I'd be very concerned about just throwing another level of training at staff and say, okay, this is for everybody. I think it's well worth doing, but I think that's probably as incorporated into respectful workplace training, for example, or some of the other forms of training that take place. I think that privacy example is a good one. That's something that is a recent addition that was supported by council and will have impacts for all staff. So I would agree with the discussion up until now that I think we need a staff report. I'll stop myself from further editorializing and ask the question to our clerk. I believe there's now a motion on the floor with respect to number 1. What would be the appropriate process for council to ask for a report at this stage?
At this stage, the appropriate action would be perhaps for the mover and seconder to withdraw that motion from the floor, and then a new motion to be put forward that the items be referred to staff for a report to come back to council.
I'll withdraw the motion.
Okay, in that case, I'd be happy to make the motion requesting a report.
Someone second that, please.
Second.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. I think there's merit in having that report returned to the committee for additional information, at least to help inform what we would get back to council. I see the establishment of a working group or a subcommittee as the opportunity to do some of that cultivating of ideas and generating potential policy outcomes. So let's take advantage of what I think is obviously a well-informed group of folks who can help us generate ideas in order to inform each of these 5 recommendations. So I'd like to see the report return to the committee, generate additional information on that basis so that staff can have a better understanding of what the intent was of each of these recommendations, and then have that come back to council. I think there's definitely merit in all 5 of these. I was trying to imagine what the execution of some of these look like, and I think it will be beneficial for council to have that level of detail before we give it any kind of endorsement. So, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Councillor Murdoch. So we still have the speakers list. I'm just going to continue from the original discussion. Councillor Drummond had his hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. I very much agree with the idea of a staff report. I think there are a lot of issues in here that could involve considerable resources and could involve some other issues as well. I certainly agree with Councillor Wortman and others who have indicated that we probably want to make sure that we use language that is descriptive of all the groups in Saanich, that we don't discriminate, that we welcome people of different sexual orientation, but also different religious orientation, and things of that nature. And I don't think we want to have situation where we're having to put up a separate sign for each one at rec centers and so forth. That just gets us into all sorts of problems, potentially. I somewhat agree with Councillor Sanders. While I'm sympathetic very much to the group involved and understands of the difficulties they have encountered over time, if we put up a sign just for that group, it does somewhat differentiate them and isolate them in a funny way, because there are many other groups that we want to make sure that people with disabilities, whoever it happens to be, that we are inclusive in that respect. I also recognize, as I mentioned, that something like sensitivity training, first of all, I think we need to find out, is there a need for that? Do we have instances of our staff not demonstrating adequate sensitivity when dealing with members of this particular group? If that's the case, then we need to rectify that. If it's not, I would be hesitant to put a lot of resources at training staff for something that is not a problem. So that kind of thing, I think, needs to be examined. And finally, I think a staff report can allow us to look at whether or not we need to reinvent the wheel. There are probably large centers like Vancouver and some of the municipalities in the Vancouver area who have moved to address these particular issues. If they are, we can take advantage of that, and that's a good thing. It's probably fairly easy, I hope, for staff to find that out. So I'm very supportive of the staff report. I agree with Councillor Murdoch that it probably, once it's generated, to go back to the committee for information and comment would be a good thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Brown?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to recognize the work the committee's done, but I also want to say that I think it does require a staff report. Personally, I think you could have done it from Healthy Saanich, could have requested something from staff. My concern is we have a number of policies that we have adopted already, like the flying of the flags during Pride Week. I just had the whole issue of our flag policy is very restrictive, and I know a number of events like BC Disability Week. There was a flag they wanted flown. There was the Respectful Seniors Week. There's a number of issues of flying flags, so that policy may have to be looked at in a broader perspective. And then I was thinking the sensitivity training, it was one that concerned me as well, because I was thinking financially. I know that we have done sensitivity training. As long as I've sat at this council, I haven't had anyone say to me I have been treated poorly or disrespected in any Saanich facility because of my disability or my age or any of those sorts of things. So I would want to know what we're currently doing. I know that staff I know Recreation did some sensitivity training a number of years ago around seniors and how to engage them in our recreation facilities, depending on hearing and various things like that. So I know that happened. So, I think the staff report is really, really needed so we can best understand what other policies this may cross and how more inclusive language could be. But I think for me, I want Saanich to be known as an inclusive community. And the languages over our front door are interesting, but we also do so much work with all the new communities that move into Saanich. So I think that the staff report will really help us to focus where we can get the most to address what this committee is saying, that maybe some of our efforts aren't as robust as they would like. But I agree that the report should go back to the committee, both the subcommittee and Healthy Saanich, and they should both roll up their sleeves and see what they can recommend coming after the full staff report. So,
Thank you. Councillor Haynes?
I really appreciate this discussion with my colleagues, and I'm resonating that Saanich buildings are welcoming and safe for all members of the community. It's not just a case of a respectful place, it's a case of inclusiveness, and also a caring place. And one of our bylines is Saanich is a family. Okay, inside a family, you care for each other, you don't just respect each other. But it's interesting, when I look at the signage, and I did make the remark when Councillor Plant first brought this forward, in the swimming areas, the changing rooms, which used to be family changing rooms, has been changed to universal. And I made that point then, and I know that that's already had an impact, because I've had couples who are living an alternate lifestyle point that out to me and say, that makes me feel comfortable, I can go in there. And I'm not a traditional family, but I want to go with my partner. So we are already having that impact. And I wonder a little bit if some of this is coming from perhaps a growing awareness, an insufficient awareness of the enthusiasm at the LGBTQ committee of what's actually already in place and how some of these policies are in place and how we could tweak them versus reinvent them. That said, there are a couple of things here. I thought the flags was interesting. I thought the diversity in the marketing, going gender neutral. These are things that other groups aren't doing, and it seems reasonable. The idea of the all-body swim, that's another interesting one. And I think we can only get the answers we need from this staff report. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Councillor Bergman, still your hand up?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I probably have a difficult time singling one particular group out on each of these issues here. And I guess I've felt in life, I really do, LFE, I really do have very few entitlements in this world. And each of us has a responsibility to be sensitive and respectful to others. But I don't have, that's not something I can demand of others, to show me respect. But I have a responsibility myself to show that to others. And I think we have to keep that in mind too. And coming back to Saanich, we do have a respectful workplace in place, which encourage all of us to be respectful to all members of our community. I'd like to see it continue.
Thank you. On my list I have Councillors Plant and Bryce.
Thank you. I was going to attempt to sever number 4 about the flags, but Councillor Brownhoff's comment about the banners policy, which is from 1988, has made it indicative that that would be out of policy, so it would be inappropriate to do it. So I'll look at another means by which to bring that forward and potentially to have that before July, just simply because I don't think that one requires a staff report, to be perfectly honest, although I appreciate the comments Councillor Brownhoff made. A couple of comments that some of my colleagues have made that I just want to bring attention to, and that is the sense of everybody being treated equally. And of course that's the case that we would want to be perceived, but I don't think we need to look very far to the south to see how some members of the LGBTQ communities are being legislated in a prescriptive and derogatory and insensitive manner. So even though you just assume, as we do, that that is not the case in Canada, and I would say for the most part those are enshrined in our legal systems, it is important for us as a community to stand up and say that these members who are experiencing persecution to greater levels than other members of our communities, that we do support them. And that I fully support the staff report. Please don't think that wrong, and I appreciate the wisdom of that. However, I'm a little hesitant, a little concerned by just some of the notion that they're just like every other group, or that we don't want to single them out. This group has experienced levels of violence greater than other groups. Being a transgender person in our community is a dangerous thing when you go into public situations in certain circumstances. I would recollect that, not unlike certain policies of civil rights, and indeed the right for women to vote, at times we're just considered, well, we don't need to do that right now. I think this is a time when people are looking at LGBTQ issues under a magnifying glass, and that we have an opportunity to make a political statement. And if that political statement is outside of people's comfort zones, I respect that. But for me, I am willing, as a resident of Saanich, to say at this point, I am willing to acknowledge this LGBTQ community as one that is oppressed. And the members of this committee, I'm unfortunate to have to say that they do sometimes feel uncomfortable coming into Saanich facilities. I invited them to come and speak if they wish to towards these motions tonight, but I think you might have heard some of them speak to that. So I do think there is a need for this. This is not me looking to get on a hobby horse to support LGBTQ. This idea of the subcommittee and all the work came from meeting with residents after being elected and then saying, we would like you to bring this topic of LGBTQ issues in Saanich forward. So I'm fully supportive of the notion of reports. I just would ask that council not take it for granted that it is already working in Saanich. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I agree with you. I don't think we know exactly what the state of things is here. There have been an occasion where someone came up to me and had some questions about the accessibility of our facilities, and they referred to one of our brochures that said it was accessible, yet they had some issues with it. So only by having those conversations and finding out the nitty-gritties that we really get a good sense of where we are and how we can improve. I've got Councillor Bryce and Sanders on the speakers list, but I'd like to give the microphone to our CEO.
If I may, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Listening to the debate by council, one of the things that struck me of the 5 recommendations from committee